Hello, what's up everyone? I'm in Punggol, Singapore, and I'm right next to the MRT station of the same name, Punggol. And this happens to be on the northeast line, which is the purple line, and it's actually the end of one of the ends of the northeast line. And in this video I'm going to show you just a little bit of this area. It's somewhat interesting. I hung out with one of my good friends from here for a bit in this area, and there's actually a man-made river in this area. I don't remember exactly where that is, but I'm at least going to show you this food. There's a food court here, and there's a bus interchange, and just some random interesting things to see for Singapore. Okay, so I'm just gonna walk around here. So behind me is some kind of Taiwanese food, Taiwanese snacks. And I've never actually been in a food place exactly like this in Singapore, as far as I know. And one thing that my friend had told me is that this place in Punggol is literally quite new. I mean, built within the last 8 years or so. So lots of things can change in Singapore if you wait a few years to come back. It's actually been eight or 9 years since I've been back to Singapore. So I've got lots of things I want to see again. And there's also lots of new stuff for me to see. Okay, so I'm gonna show you a bit more of this area. And what I had for kind of a snack slash like almost like a lunch was I had a kebab. Had a beef kebab. My friend and I, we each got one, and it happened to be $6. And in any case, it was from this place behind me, Mr. Kebab. It was not bad. It was a little expensive for my taste, but I still thought it was pretty good. And it's getting close to 11 p.m. I believe, so lots of places have already closed. But in any case, I still want to show you just a little bit of this area. And all these people seem to be gone. There's a Singapore Nature Society thing here. So I imagine that here they just try to educate you on environmentalism, how to care for the environment, and probably take some donations. So here are just a bunch of signs for the animals they want to help, and I assume these are animals native to Singapore. And this was yet another thing I've never seen in my whole life, which is fried Oreo. I've never heard of somebody doing that before, but I suppose people are going to try almost every combination of foods. I've just never seen a fried Oreo before. Okay, so I'm going to walk through the... I'm not actually going to enter through the gates that you need to pay for through the MTR, but I just want to show you just a little bit of the inside of the station of Punggol MTR. And as I said, this is on the purple line. It's at the end of the northeast line, so the purple line is also called northeast line. Probably mostly people would call it the northeast line, but if you look at a map like this one, in any case, it's Punggol is up here. So if you want to look at a MTR map, just one of the ends of the purple line is Punggol, and it is an interesting place. Basically I've never been here before, I think. In previous videos I mentioned I used to live in Singapore actually, and I really love Singapore. And having come back here, it's made me consider coming back to move here actually, because Singapore is a really amazing place. Okay, so right now I'm going to just walk around this area. So, and this is right next to the MRT, sorry. In Hong Kong it's called MTR, so I always confuse MRT with MTR. Okay, so anyway, this area is a bus interchange, and see there are a bunch of buses here, double-decker buses. So this is either the end or the start of this is sort of a bus hub that can go to many different places. Yeah, so as I mentioned, a lot of this stuff here is new, like built within the last few years. So Singapore is always changing, always growing. And as I mentioned, if you wait a few years, if you come to Singapore and wait a few years, most likely a lot of things are going to be quite different. Because this is an always, sort of evolving place. Okay. So I just wanted to sort of walk in this area, show you different stuff. And as I've mentioned, there's actually like a man-made river in this area, which is kind of interesting, though I don't remember how to get there. Okay, so here's a random sign here. You'll see a lot of these kinds of signs in Singapore. So basically, report criminal activity and stuff like this to the police. So Singapore is probably the safest place I've ever been in my entire life, and I've been to a lot of places. I've pretty much never felt unsafe in Singapore, and yeah, so somehow, I don't know exactly how, but they've made it a very safe society. I think a lot of it has to do with socialization. From a young age, they're taught to behave, basically, and that it wouldn't work if just the society, the government was always telling you endlessly. People have to choose to do it, and it seems that people here, love their country or really like it, so they actually, and a lot of them are really quite helpful and nice people. Though you also will see lots of signs for penalties if you don't obey the rules. Singapore is pretty strict. So like behind me here, there's a sign for basically, and I've seen this in other places in Singapore too, that basically if you don't use a light on your bicycle when it's dark, you could potentially get a big fine or even go to jail. So I think that's a bit extreme to go to jail for 6 months for not using a light on your bicycle, though. it may have saved lives. Yeah, so and here's another sign for fines. So if you, there's a police enforcement camera. So Singapore is very, very safe, as I've mentioned. Although, I would definitely say from personal experience that the government is very efficient and they're pretty strict about the rules. They don't like to make so many exceptions. So only in rare cases would they make exceptions to their rules. Although that's probably, I mean, in the end, that's probably a good thing, because Singapore is one of the least corrupt countries in the world, and I think that's a very good thing. And Singapore politicians are very often, before they become a politician, they're already an expert in some field or fields, or they're famous, or they've become fairly wealthy, a good business person, and so on. So to become a member of parliament, often, I think, at least the way it was described to me a few years ago, is that you have to actually be invited to run for parliament. It's not the case that just any Singaporean can run. As far as I know, it may have changed in the years since I've been gone. But in any case, also, like the ministers here are paid very well, millions of dollars. It doesn't matter Singapore dollars or US dollars. Singapore politicians are paid amongst the highest of any politicians in the world, as far as I know. I mean, as a salaried politician, I don't mean like a prince or a king who basically can just take as much money as they want. In Singapore, the politicians are paid very well, but in some ways I think that's actually a very good thing, because if a politician is paid well, presumably they would have less incentive to want to take bribes, and so they'd be less corrupt. At least that's the theory. The logic makes sense to me. And I think the results speak for themselves too, because Singapore has consistently been rated by different organizations as one of the least corrupt countries. And of course, if a country is not corrupt, which goes by law and order and so on, more people would want to invest, I think. So in any case, there's so many great things about Singapore. And before I end this video, I just want to show you, I've sort of showed you some of the same stuff. I want to show you some new stuff. And okay, so on the right again was food place. And it is dark, and unfortunately I have forgotten where the man-made river is, but there's still interesting things to see. And one thing I've noticed a lot, which I hadn't seen like very often when I was here in Singapore a few years ago, was there's a lot of can't think of the word, little electric small electric scooters. I can't think of the term, but in any case, and there's lots of bicycles you can see here, and I think these ones you can actually rent with your mobile phone. Yeah, if you you have to download the app first, but you can scan the QR code and rent the bicycle that way. And Chinese is one of the, probably the second biggest language after English, and definitely learning Chinese is very popular here. because in part the majority ethnic group are Chinese, and in Singapore I believe everyone in school is required to learn a foreign language, and usually people would study the foreign language of their ethnic background. So if they're an ethnic Indian, most likely they would study Tamil or Hindi. If you're Chinese ethnic, most likely you'll study Chinese. Though I don't know if you're allowed to choose if you don't want to study that, but it's most common from what I've heard that that's just the way it is. You study the foreign language of your ethnic background. Okay, and this here is, I'm on a footpath. This looks like some kind of interesting landscaping around me. And that there, those are some, they look like pull-up bars. But you'll find these kinds of things in Hong Kong and Singapore. And lots of just, I don't know if it's a Chinese culture thing. But in any case, oh yeah, and they have signs too, where like if you have a dog, you should clean up after your dog. So Singapore is probably the cleanest and probably the safest place I've ever been. And as I mentioned, this area, according to my friend, is quite new. And it does definitely look well planned out. And above us looks like some kind of LRT or MRT bridge. So in Punggol, there's actually, it's connected to an LRT, which is another train line. So having learned that, this area actually seems more appealing to me, just because although it's at the end of the purple line, you may waste a little bit of time in commuting, but you can also travel. There's actually an LRT line here which connects to the MRT, which is, in my opinion, kind of interesting. Okay, so behind me, I believe this is kind of a typical sort of apartment complex or condo place. And often you'll see playgrounds like behind me. I'm not sure if you can see. So often there are, oh yeah, and here's some more exercise equipment, which is kind of nice. It is dark, but hopefully you can see. So there's like a spinning wheel. And you'll often see old people working. And here's a beam hop. So you'll often see old people in these kinds of places, but I mean, a person of pretty much any age above teenager, I presume, could use them. And if you ever come to Singapore, one thing you'll notice is they have extremely good urban planning. I even took an urban planning course here for a short time, and I remember an instructor talking about how Singapore, if my memory serves, there are some things about Singapore they literally plan like 50 years ahead, and they might even have upwards of a 100-year plan for some things. Whereas in a lot of countries, they don't even plan 2 years ahead of time. In Singapore, they plan many, many years ahead of time for lots of things, especially with urban planning. Okay, so I've now gone back to the very close to the MRT, and just sort of randomly, this thing is something I think would be tasty, a kaya ball. I'm not sure if that's a well, I guess that it says Bugis traditional street food, so I guess that it would be a Singaporean food to try. So if I have tried that, it would have been a long time ago. Okay, so oh yeah, so yeah, so I think I've mainly showed you. I think I've showed you this area before. And just sort of randomly here, you'll see Singapore has a lot of tuition centers, or tutorial centers, for basically after school, they do some extra studying. Okay, so as a recap for this video, I just kind of showed you around the area of Punggol. That's a place in Singapore that has an MRT line connected to the MRT. It's at the end of the purple line. Okay, so finally, if you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to my channel. And finally, if you could like the video, I'd appreciate it very much. And if you'd like to leave a comment, feel free to do so. Thank you.